All right, chat. Y'all should see us and hear us. Well, you know we're here anyway.
Hello, chat.
Hello, chat. Nice to see you all. Oh, I was going to retweet all this real quick. We are live with Greg and John from FPC talking your questions for Ghost. Come join us and be a part of it. Okay. Let me just copy this. Okay. All right, awesome. We are now posted in all the places. Put it on Blue Sky as well. All right. Hey, Wabbit, Diggs, and Joe. It's good to have you all here. More of you will roll in as we go. Let me make sure everyone is on video. Looks like all four. The grid's good. Greg's good. Two screen good. Okay. Oh, man. We're so ready. It's gross how good we are. 7 of these, man. And now we're good. You know? All right. Let's do this. Is it really our 7th? Holy crap. Yeah, it is. 7 months? Jeez.
Wow.
That was a fast 7 months.
I would have guessed I'd done about 4 of these. Wow.
I know, right? I guess.
Well, you skipped one.
Yeah,
so.
that's true. You were gone last
right.
time.
Okay, so I have done about 4.
Yeah. Well, yes. 5. This will be your 6th. Okay, here we go. Turgid Gherkin, thank you. Welcome. All right, I'm going to close this. Although I'm not really that comfortable saying turgid jerkin.
No, turgid gherkin.
Yeah, I kind of have regrets now that I've said it. Okay, here we go, everybody. Let me kill. Oh, I got some music going we don't need. There we go. Excellent. All right, the standard introduction begins as soon as I hit play on recording. Good deal there. Okay. We are recording. Here we go in 3, 2, 1.
Fantastic Pixel Castle and Frog Pants Studios presents Word on the Street with Greg Street and Scott Johnson.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Word on the Street for the month of May. Yes, that's right. Spring is here, and so is a bunch of stuff about Ghost. Greg Street with me, as always. Hello, Greg.
Hey, it's nice to be back after Halinka's terrible showing last time.
I know. Can you believe the swath of destruction he left in his path? My gosh.
He almost ended the whole podcast.
I know. I thought long and hard about it, but then when you came back from China, I went, okay, we'll give it one more shot.
I'm just kidding. It went awesome. I should skip more often.
Yeah, he was great. It's always fun to talk to Brian, and super stoked we finally got him on. And it's great to have you back. You were just in China. How'd things go? Go well over there?
It went well. Yeah. NetEase is a Chinese company, and when the CEO shows interest in your game, you hop on a plane and show him the game. So
sure,
it went really well.
So
NetEase has a lot of experience making MMOs. This is a different kind of game than what they're used to. So we wanted to kind of educate them all about what it is.
Do they, from their perspective, they understand kind of that you're at the sketch phase in a lot of ways? You know, they get that. For example, some of the footage you guys showed the community a month ago or so, that, you know, a lot of that is in-game or in-engine assets that you're using as placeholders until you get stuff in. I mean, they get that, right? When you go and talk to them, they understand that?
Oh, yeah. NetEase is a game company. They've made lots and lots of games. They know what it looks like in the early phase.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. Well, good news, everybody. We have a guest with us today. When I say guest, somebody who's kind of been here all along. He's just sort of in the behind the scenes, making sure things happen. You'll remember him from the original Q&A that these guys did up in Canada. Welcome to the program, Mr. John Spectre, VP of Business at Fantastic Pixel Castle. Hello, John.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me. It is fun having helped, I guess, with 6 of these behind the scenes to now get my turn here.
That's right. And also a big shout out. You guys won't see her today, but Faye is in the background making sure these questions go well today. She's been gathering them all week. Just huge thanks to her for all that back end help, because it would be a lot trickier to do this sort of thing without her. So very much appreciate it. You were also in China. You got any thoughts about how all that went? Were you nervous? Were you excited? Like, how'd it go?
I was definitely nervous going into it because I think any time that you have the opportunity to show what you've done, but you get like a couple of hours to do it, I think figuring out the best way to represent the awesome work of the team is always tricky. And I also had enough familiarity with NetEase from my time actually at Blizzard working with them on the joint venture. But I never met William, the CEO of NetEase, before, so I didn't quite know what to expect. But It was, as Greg said, it was amazing actually, and it was really exciting and energizing for me to just see how they're thinking about the studio and our game, and the just sort of total unconditional support for the team's vision for Ghost, which was awesome.
Yeah, that is great. Well, I'm glad it was a successful trip. Quick note about I took a trip to China once, and Greg, this is mostly for you, a little anecdote. But during that very long flight, as you know, it's a long flight. Me and the guy I worked for at the time whipped out notebooks and played Age of Empires 2 the entire trip. So there's that. Yeah. So you're in my life in a very specific way then, even before we met. Well, anyway, let's get right to it. We've decided today is all about questions. It's about you guys and what you want to know, the burning stuff in the back of your heads about what Ghost is, what it is now, what it's going to be. And it turns out a lot of you are very forward thinking about your questions. You're not just asking sort of early stage questions. You're saying, what about this when the game's out for a while? What about expansion questions? What about, we got a phone call about preservation of games and how it might apply to this particular MMO. So really ran the gamut. Thanks everybody for your amazing questions. We're going to dive right into one. Greg, I think this is probably best for you. This comes from Twitter from Decrum Dog, who says, can you give us a better understanding of the style of storytelling? Will it go as dark and as evil as 40K, that being Warhammer 40K? Or will it be close to a happier game? Or will it have a broad spectrum? So that's a broad question, but I think you can probably give us some more nuggets on that sort of thing. What does this story look like so far?
Oh yeah, this is really important. You just mentioned Age of Empires, which is a great tie-in because we would like to say the sun is always shining on Age of Empires. So even though you were committing awful mayhem on the battlefield and, thousands of people were dying to further the goals of your empire, it was still beautiful. There were trees, the birds were singing, it was always sunny. And we learned that and forgot it over and over on World of Warcraft because the best zones, let's face it, are places like, Jade Forest or Grizzly Hills, which are wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous scenery. And then we would make zones like Shadow Moon Valley, which are oppressive and fell. And even though they're epic, even Ice Crown had this problem. Even though they're epic, they're really exhausting to spend a lot of time in as a player. Right. You're like, oh, it's oppressive. It's kind of a little, depressing here. And even though I'm here fighting the bad guys, it's I don't want to spend a lot of time there. So
right.
Ghost overall has a really hopeful tone. We want it to be a beautiful place. There are going to be, we're spending a lot of effort to make sure the maps are gorgeous. The sun won't always be shining, but it'll be shining a lot. And we're not going to have a lot of fell oceans out there. But we still need to have conflict and we need to have stakes. Like we're not making, a cozy farming game. No offense to cozy farming games out there. We want to have villains that you want to kill. We want to have bad guys. We want to have enough threats to society that you feel like you have to overcome these threats. So the art style will be pretty. Some of the storytelling will be darker, but not Warhammer, grim.
Right. It sounds like a world worth fighting for, perhaps, is what you're describing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think I like that.
D&D 4th edition, they described their world as points of light, like society is points of light against this darker fabric. So it makes sense you can go to a tavern and have a drink with your friends and that it doesn't feel out of character. But then there's all this adventure to be had kind of in between these points of light. And I like that framework.
Yeah, I do as well. Let me ask a quick question of John, because this just came up in the chat. A bunch of people in there, by the way, are recognizing you from Overwatch. wait, isn't that guy from Overwatch is the common refrain in there.
He did all the good stuff in Overwatch, and then Kaplan did all the questionable stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Take that, Jeff. But then there's a follow-up question about that, which says, has the team thought about adding a class that can revive people, sort of like Mercy from Overwatch? I feel like that would be so cool. This is obviously a very specific question, and maybe one you can't answer this early on classes and what they will do. But from your experience on that team, John, are there lessons there that you hope to see the team implement here, or maybe already have?
When we've talked about class design for Ghost, one of the things that we've been trying to do is create a game that can support tons of classes. So sort of a little bit different from a lot of MMOs where there's 5, 10, even 15 classes, and each class can kind of do a lot of different things, or sometimes this class can be a tank and sometimes they're a melee DPS or other types of things. Instead, we've been trying to think about more classes that each have a much more sort of specific and defined role or set of things that they excel at, and then encourage players to try different classes, make the game really alt-friendly. And I think one of the things, I've actually never really thought about this as a direct analog to my experience in Overwatch, but I think one of the things that the Overwatch team does an incredible job with is that each of the heroes in that game has their own distinct fantasy, their own, this is the thing that hero is best at, that they bring to the situation that no other hero can. Even though you have multiple different options for heals or multiple different options for range DPS or things like that, the heroes, I think, each sort of fit their own fantasy for players where, okay, you want to not just be a range DPS, but you love the idea of flying around in combat. You've got Pharah for that, and that's super cool. So I think for us, one of the goals is to make each of those classes fill a distinct fantasy for players, and create their own kind of fun individual gameplay that other classes aren't going to replicate as much.
It's a great lead into this question that is mainly pointed at you, Greg, but we can kind of go off what John just said. This is Risotto on Twitter, who says, your thoughts on the usual role system in MMOs and or the holy trinity of DPS, healer, and tank. As a support main in games afraid of taking damage and dishing it out, it's hard for me to settle into games like Guild Wars 2 with loose role systems, but I understand people who like it. Overall, from a I don't know, from a planning aspect or where you guys are so far in the process of building this game, is there?
Yeah, we're going to have the Holy Trinity. We're going to have tank, healer, and DPS. I think it is possible to do something different. I think there are games that have done that. If we wanted to take on that design challenge, that might be fun. But we're taking on so many design challenges, we thought it might just be a little safer in this case to say, we know some people approach every RPG they play as, I like to be a healer. Show me where I can heal. And when playing with friends or playing with strangers, it's helpful to know kind of the role that you want to take on. So we're going to innovate a little bit in combat and class design, but we will have tanks, healers, DPS. Maybe we'll do some creative things. We have a designer that worked a lot on the Evoker for World of Warcraft, so we might experiment a bit, but there'll still be those 3 roles for sure.
Yeah, maybe does that. Well, let me just do a quick follow up in my head here. If that's the case, you start with the Trinity, makes things easier from a design standpoint, or at least to just get going, right? But later down the line, that doesn't mean that some interesting hybrids could crop up, right? Like you're not saying no to those potential strange new ways of looking at the Trinity or altering the way the Trinity works. You just got to start somewhere.
Sure. And one of the nice things about wanting to support lots of classes, when I was on World of Warcraft, we felt like, well, if you give a taunt to one tank, you better give a taunt to the other tanks, or they just won't be as competitive. But it kind of opens it up for us to have a lot of variety. If maybe we have a healer that also does a little bit of damage, and that's okay because the other healers will do something different. So we can be clever, and we can break down barriers and try experiments, and it's kind of okay if not every class is viable in every single situation, right? Because we have so many.
Sure. So here's a question, John, I would love to ask. From the business standpoint, and this is a bit of a swing from talking about gameplay and all that, but from a business standpoint, can you speak to, at this stage, the goals of Ghost as a business, because that is what it is. You know, paychecks have to be made, investment has to happen, revenue has to be generated. All those things have to have plans around them. And I'm curious, as somebody who's, you know, you're knuckle deep in that stuff, how's that all working so far, or anything you want to say to that in that regard?
Sure. It is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and take that responsibility really seriously, because I think making good decisions here has to balance a whole bunch of different priorities, and a lot of times that can be really hard. And if you mess it up, you can create really negative consequences, either sort of for your team in the studio or for your players in your game. And so, for us, I think some of this probably sounds obvious and you know, maybe a little bit even oversimplified, but we want to make a game that we're going to support for many, many, many years, and be able to deliver consistent, quality, awesome content for our players. And so that means that whatever business we come up with can't just be, we try to sell the game on day one and then don't have any ongoing revenue.
Right.
But I also think as you start to get into more typical sort of what I'd call free-to-play or live service monetization strategies, that's where you can introduce all sorts of pain for your players if you do it wrong. And I think, you know, on one extreme, right, you could say, if you're monetizing too much of the game down the line, you're taking away from things that you could instead make core to the gameplay experience, or turning off players who would have otherwise loved your game. I think the other big principle for us is trying to think about this on a long-term basis, which is honestly a huge luxury. And when I look at a lot of what's going on in the gaming landscape today, and where I think a lot of friction between developers and players on the business and monetization side of things comes up, it's actually often for more short-term needs or requirements of like, hey, our studio is about to run out of money tomorrow. What can we do to try to make some more money the next day? Or we're going to go into early access and we're going to sell early access because we need more money in order to finish developing the game, or we need to support our Kickstarter or other types of things.
Right.
And because of the NetEase relationship, we have the luxury of being able to say, what's the right set of things to do for our game and for our players long term? And then I think the last big principle, and something I've talked with Greg and our designers and a lot of the team about a lot, is I think depending on the type of business that you create for an MMO, you're sort of incentivizing the team in the game to pursue different types of outcomes. And so like I'll give an example, right, where if we decided we wanted to be in the subscription business, then a lot of what we're doing is trying to create reasons why players should log in every single day or every single week or at least every single month so that they keep their sub up. And that's really different than if you're in the business of, we're free to play, but we sell cosmetics, or really different than if you're in the business of, we're just going to be a paid box, like kind of an old school business. And so I think for us, trying to make sure that the choices we make around the business line up with the type of experiences that we want to deliver for players, the way we want to deliver content, that's all really important. So like really long-winded way of saying, we have figured out exactly zero of this so far. But I'm also really aware of, there are choices that we can make here. Like we know that our core audience for this is MMO players. And I think there are certain choices we can make on the business that are just absolute non-starters for that group of players.
Yeah.
And so we've already drawn really clear lines internally of, we're not selling power in this game, or things like that, where we know that you do that and you lose all of the players that we hope to win over and build trust with for Ghost.
I've noticed a lot of conversation around Ghost in my own community does center around, well, what are their business plans going to be? Is this a free to play game? Is this a subscription based game? Like all these kind of questions. And I always am a little surprised about how much of the questions surround that, but I also shouldn't be probably surprised, because I feel like the MMO space in general has kind of been preparing players to ask these questions, because there's been a lot of experimentation over the last, let's say, 10 years, and some good choices and interesting ideas and some not so great from various games. And things like loot boxes sort of came and soured people and have sort of gone away. depending on the game. But also you're seeing the introduction of things like battle passes, which people seem a little more amenable to. I guess what I'm saying is I don't envy that wall that you have to climb because I feel like it's
tough, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we ran a study last year, actually, just a couple of months after founding the studio, to try to ask MMO players, like, what would you want to see in a new game that would get you excited about it? And one of the questions that we asked in that study was sort of how do you feel about some of the bigger models for the business of MMOs? We asked about how do you feel about just buying the game up front? What about a subscription model? What about an MTX-driven cosmetics model? And the shocking finding from that study was that players don't like any of those things, right? Like they are every way that you choose here is going to create some set of issues and some set of friction. And in some ways, I think detract from the gaming experience. So like I very much understand why for every big new MMO that gets announced, like it is one of players' first questions, because I think if you make the wrong set of choices here, you are going to diminish the gameplay experience to the extent that like, hey, that's not what I want as a player, and it would be good to know up front if this is a game I should be excited about or not.
Yeah, for sure. Here's one in the chat that I think is really great. It is, what was your first big mistake? Greg, I'll throw this to you. What was your first big mistake you made, and how do you recover and learn from it? I mean, you can just say as in regards to Ghost, if there have been any big mistakes so far, but if you want, you can point to other examples, but I'm curious how you would answer that question.
Wow, that's a great question.
It
What's the
really
biggest
is.
mistake on Ghost? We've made a bunch. That's just part of game development.
Probably nothing you feel like you can't recover from, though, right? Like they're all learning experiences in the end.
Yeah, I really want. So on the Riot MMO, I felt like I was too far removed from game development. Like I was kind of running the team, and Ghost is very much my baby, and I wanted to make sure that I was super involved. I don't ever want to be one of those out of touch executives that's like, you know, what are those kids doing down in the basement? Like I'm working on the game day to day. I had hoped I would have a little more time to work on the game. Sometimes you gotta get on a plane to fly to China. You're not getting a lot of work done on the game that day. So maybe I was just a little naive. I'm not planning on changing it. I still think it's really important to our success that I focus a lot on Ghost as well as on FPC. But I guess I naively thought I'd be spending more time focusing on just making the game and you know, hiring people like John to help run the studio part.
Yeah, you need guys like.
But
John.
we all wear a lot of hats. It's kind of one of the fun things about being small and new is everyone does a lot of different things.
Yeah, there's a whole other conversation could be had. We don't have to have it today, but the whole thing about how to deal with that early on, because you've got people wearing different hats, but eventually they're gonna have to pass those hats around. How do you decide how you divvy those hats up? Who gets what hat? Like that just sounds like it's business, I guess. Everybody does this, but how you guys handle it is pretty interesting. Let's stay with you for a second on blue shards. We got a Twitter person, Twitter/X from, let's see, Magiga MMO, I believe is the name. Do you see blue shards as the primary innovation for Ghost? What ideas do you have for red shards to tackle common MMO problems like stale content, group content conflicts like gatekeeping, mismatched expectations, etc., add-on bloat, necessity, and poor new player experiences? There's a lot in that. It's a loaded question, but from the shard, from the bread,
our major innovation. It won't be the only innovation, but it's really where we're focusing, because we think that feature helps us to solve a lot of problems, such as it's hard to play with friends, it's hard to feel my impact on the world. It's hard to have a new sense of discovery after playing through Westfall on my 6th vault, things like that. And so blue shards is the answer to a lot of that. It does place a lot of pressure on the red shards, which are the more traditional MMO zones, to be really good. Like you're not going to see a ton of randos in your blue shard. So when you're going to the red shards, they need to be epic. You need to see a lot of people, and it can't be, I'm going to go find a corner over here to grind on mobs or farm, because we want it to feel like, a lot of world bosses, a lot of things where you're happy to have a big group around. They should all feel really epic.
Right. John, anything to add to that? I mean, you're a player. You want that to be a good experience. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the reason why we have been so focused on blue zones in prototype is because it is both, as Greg said, the answer to a lot of how we think we recenter exploration and the joys of discovery and all of that. And also it's really hard. And you know, I suspect that if this were an easy thing to nail, like maybe you would have seen other people do it. And so the team's been really hard at work, both trying to prove out if we nail this, it is as fun and impactful as we think it is, but also that from a technical perspective and a design perspective, that we actually can deliver experiences that feel exciting and new and fresh the 40th time that you map into a blue zone in Ghost. And so it's not, as Greg said, like the only innovation in Ghost, but there are so many elements of the MMO genre where we look at it and we say, you know what, this other game has a great crafting system, or this game has figured out inventory, or other things like that, where it gives us a ton of confidence that we don't really need to innovate there, and it's kind of a solved problem in the MMO space. And so we'll be able to double back to that stuff later. Right now, our inventory system in Ghost is not particularly compelling or deep. You can pick up items and then press I to open up your bag and see them in there. So like it works, but it's not a focus for the team now, because we know that when we get around to building a proper inventory system, we'll be able to do that without much trouble.
Gotcha. So we get a lot of questions about fishing. I don't know why, but we do for the show, and we're going to finally address it. So Greg, and then we'll talk to John too, because I'm curious about both your takes on this. Mika from the chat is this is the most emblematic of the question, but plenty have been asking it in different ways and different formats. It says, the most important question of all, will Ghost have fishing? Because if it won't be the best MMO if it doesn't. They all want fishing mini games, clearly. So Greg, it's early, yeah, I know, but are we going to fish in this
No,
world?
I literally have an advanced degree in oceanography. Like, we will have fishing.
Yeah. Of course you will. Well, I didn't even think of that, but yeah, you're going to bring a special.
It'll be super fun for me to help come up with a ton of different species of fish and talk about the ecosystem they live in. Like, thematically, what are we going to do? Is it going to be like, a Twitch game versus you have to match the right bait to the right location? Like, it's too early for any of that. But we love fishing as a we don't have a lot of solo activities in the game. I think fishing makes a good one. It's a good downtime activity. It's a good, I don't really feel like killing monsters right now. What can I kind of do to be in the world and travel to beautiful places? And I think fishing's great for that.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, if you guys will bring any specific innovations to it, because right now it's basically, does the thing wiggle? Cool. Pull. Now pull the fish out. I got a fish. It's how WoW does it. How's every other MMO that I know of does this. You wait for the bobble to move, and then you pull the fish in. Maybe you guys can get crazy with that and make it more than.
But I haven't thought a lot about this, but I have thought a little bit about it. The old RPG Okami has a great fishing game, because when you pull the fish out, you then have to hit the fish with your sword. And likewise, there's the Van Bleer ridiculous fishing, where you pull the fish out and then you have to shoot them.
Yeah. Which
sounds dumb, but one of the things I really like about that is you get to see the fish.
Yeah.
In a lot of fishing mini games, the fish is an icon, and you're just kind of clicking on your bobber, and the whole game is around the bobber. But the fun part of fishing is seeing the animal, like, oh, how big is it? Is it rare? Is it pretty? So I like the idea that somehow the fish jumps out of the water and you get to like behold it in all its glory.
Yeah,
and that's as far as we've gone.
But that's farther than I expected. I figured you guys would have less information about how you were going to handle that, but it sounds like you got some ideas.
I just learned live on this podcast how we're handling. There are so many moments where, like, someone in the studio will post some, like, here's a picture of a fish or a bird and Greg will respond with like a treatise of, yes, in my PhD, I studied this thing extensively, and here's everything that you've ever wanted to know, and then some about that species of fish.
Yeah,
so
that's amazing.
It makes sense. Like I will admit to personally not being a huge fishing enjoyer in my video games, but like every game that I play at this point, like Destiny added fishing. And you have the whole fishing sequence and mini games in Hades. Like I think you kind of can't launch a major game at this point and not do it. So that's how I've thought about it, at least.
Yeah, I think that's funny. I never really thought about it, but yeah, every MMO, if they don't have fishing, it's probably WoW's fault because I don't know. I don't know. Did EverQuest have fishing? I don't remember. Maybe they did. EQ2 does, but anyway, the idea of fishing in an MMO or any big sort of adventure game feels like that got established and then everybody else had to follow through. And it makes me wonder what other features like that are mandatory that we're not currently thinking about. You guys probably have to think of those things, especially later in development, right?
Yeah, I think transmog is mandatory at this point. Some type of group finder. I hope it's not, I say this with love because I worked so much on the Dungeon Finder feature for WoW, but I hope I've learned some since then of what not to do.
Yeah.
But then other things like, will we have pet battles? Probably not. Maybe we won't have pet battles ever. Who knows? Some of that just isn't important to launch with, and maybe isn't important to the game at all.
Right. I guess it depends on the game, but yeah, that's interesting. If one game comes along and there's a part of it that everyone's just like, oh, every quest has a voiceover in this game. ESO is very good at this. All of their stuff is professionally, beautifully voice acted. Even the smallest side quests. There are no quests where it's just text, and it's impressive that they're able to pull that off. It seems like one of their chief things to play that game for is that very thing. Do you guys see that as important? Like that level of fidelity versus just looking at a quest window, but in fact, communicating with voiced characters. Have you thought about that at all at this point?
Yes, we have thought about it, and I imagine we will do something in that space. Like, it's really hard. I love RPGs. It's probably my most played genre. It's really hard to go from Baldur's Gate 3 back to older RPGs. Like Rogue Trader came out after Baldur's Gate 3. I love Rogue Trader, but the characters are just icons. They have great VO, but they don't animate. And in Baldur's Gate, they all animate. That said, animation is extremely expensive. Voiceover is really expensive. It's not a fun decision to make to say, well, we're going to have fewer NPCs because we have to give them all voices. And I know people will say, oh, this is something AI can fix.
Right.
I don't know about that. In general, we have to be smart about how we let you, have conversations with NPCs. Like, people don't read the quest text in WoW. It's sad but true. Yeah. They're more likely to listen to voiceover, but not if it gets really, really long and annoying and just kind of want to skip through it either.
Yeah, I always.
Do you have thoughts, John?
Yeah, what do you think, John?
So some of this stuff, my metaphor for this is thinking actually about allocating your stat points in an RPG, where we're gonna have to make choices as we build Ghost of we want to ship this game more quickly than is typical and not spend 20 years on it. I'd rather, not have it be the most expensive game to make in the history of games either. And so we're going to have to make at some point some prioritization choices about what do we think is most important to focus on. And are there things when we look at the landscape of MMOs, if we try to take everything that we think is awesome about each of WoW and ESO and RuneScape and Final Fantasy and all of the other games out there, we're never going to ship Ghost. And so I think we'll have to be careful about what do we think matters most to make this game awesome. But I've had the exact same observation as Greg, just playing MMOs, where you go from these worlds where I think they've really invested a lot of their stat points in immersion and storytelling and things like voice acting. And then I go back to I'm reading the walls of text, or in some cases not reading the walls of text. Mm-hmm. And there's definitely a difference there. So as a player, I think that's something I value a lot. I just thinking about how do we make sure we ship this game. Mm. There will be places where we know that the thing is cool, we would love to have it. And do we want to spend 6 more months to get the game out, or do we want to ship the game and then add it in the next update or things like that? Those will be choices we'll have to make.
Interesting. Speaking of launching the game, there is a question from Hondo Shaver. I don't want to know the origin of that game or that name, but he says, this is on Twitter, he says, given games like Baldur's Gate 3's success in early access, What are your thoughts on early access in general, on Ghost or otherwise? Let's keep it with John for a second, then we'll go to Greg on this as well. As a model for getting a game in front of people and also, in their case, generating revenue. But there are plenty of examples of early access free-to-play games as well. Is this even on the table? Too early? Like, where are we at with the whole idea?
We like it, but I would, and we've talked about this at the studio. Like I think the word early access or the term early access can actually be used in two different ways by games. One is, I think, what BG3 did. I think it's actually basically what Hades 2 is doing now, where they've got enough of the game that they're ready to get meaningful feedback from players, and they're going to stay in early access while they meaningfully update, refine the game, add more to it, and make sure, importantly, that like the foundation of what they've built is resonating enough with players that they're on the right track. And then I think there's like a totally separate second thing that also gets called early access, where it's like, hey, if you pay for the $300 edition of our game, you can play it 2 weeks before anyone else, or things like that. And that's, just to be super clear, like that's not what we're talking about when we say we want early access for Ghost. We've been talking about it as a way to make sure that we're continuing to engage players as we build and refine what we're doing with Ghost. So I really like the idea of doing it. I think it introduces a whole bunch of tricky questions, particularly around progression and like, do you carry forward, okay, someone played in early access, when the game launches, do they start a new character? Do they have some amount of stuff carry over? And like those are really tricky questions that I at least don't feel like we have great answers for at this point, but have started to tackle and think about, because I think if we could do it well, an early access launch of sorts for Ghost would be incredibly valuable for us in making the game better.
What do you think, Greg? The other EA in the world, how does that land on you as studio head?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly our philosophy. We said a minute ago that our big innovation was blue shards, which is true. The other big innovation, though, is the fact that we're talking about this game so early. Like, we're recording a podcast. I mean, we want players to see it early and often. We are not going to be the game that says, oh, you had great feedback on Endgame and we don't have time to implement it. Maybe we'll get there in the future. Like, we're going to keep having these interactions with the players until we feel pretty confident that we have a sizable group excited about the game and where it's going to land. And we'll keep iterating until we get there, ideally before we charge anyone a cent.
Right. This next question is kind of a business focused one. John, this will be for you a lot, I think, but feel free as usual for either of you to pipe in on this. Let's see. Let's do this one. Just Blaise from Twitter says, looking forward to the future, when a game has a few expansions under its belt, one that MMOs can sometimes struggle with is the amount of amount of content a new player can or may have to purchase in order to experience the game so far. I think that's something a lot of us can relate to when it comes to getting in late or coming back. Anyway, this can not only be a problem for a player's perspective, onboarding can be tricky, but also can create spiky revenue graphs for most users. Does FPC see Ghost utilizing a buy them as they come model for the foreseeable future, or is there a possibility that Ghost adapts a value-add subscription model that would include historical expansions and consequently drive more consistent and predictable ARPU across specific segments of its customer base? Obviously, this is once again, we're jumping a little bit ahead on some of these concepts, because who knows until you get there, like expansion content and that sort of thing. Any overall on that, John, as a question?
Sure. I'm almost certain that like whatever I say here, there will be in however many years, clips of, oh, but you said however many years ago. We are, just the usual disclaimer, like we are still thinking about this stuff, and we probably will be for a couple of years before we land on anything final. But I will say, like, I think the observation that player is making is spot on. I have games that I've like tried to convince friends to play, and then their first question is like, do I have to buy 6 expansions and spend $300 before I can really enjoy that game? And I think putting up that kind of barrier for new players is not really the business that we want to be in. I do really like models that have, if you've been an active player all along and a new expansion comes out and you have everything but that new expansion, like maybe there's one lower price for that expansion, but then when you release it, you also give for new players a way to just get everything that they need with one purchase, where what you'd effectively be doing is, if you launch like a second expansion to Ghost, then the thing that a new player is buying is original Ghost, expansion 1 and expansion 2, all in one purchase at a reasonable price point. And if you've already been playing Ghost and you bought the first expansion, or you're playing the first expansion and the second one comes out, then that's the only thing that we might ask you to. I'm not even sure that we'll go down that road of like, that's how we want to deliver content and that's how we want to monetize it. But if we do, I think avoiding that problem of, I want to try this game as a new player, and now they're trying to sell me 5 different full price expansions all at once. Like that just doesn't work well from my perspective.
I think I have to assume that this is true, but you can tell me. You're a team of players. You guys all love playing, right? You're all gamers. If you try to approach these business decisions as, well, I'm a gamer, what would I want? Like how would I want to be sold this game, or how would I want to pay for this, or what would be my onboarding process to expansions in? Do you guys do that? Do you ask that of yourselves and say, well, what do I want? Does that paint the picture? Because my experience is, or my expectation is, it's more complicated than that. It can't always be what your player brain wants. Sometimes it also has to be, what does the market want? What do we want within that market? If we want to compete at all, we do have to do these certain things that maybe as a player, I either don't understand enough or just straight up don't like the sound of it. But in this business context, it's different. It's kind of a complicated question, but do you know what I'm saying with that? And how do you look at these things? Do you look at it as player first or business guy first? How do you do it?
I think that the wearing your player hat is really important, but there are like 2 traps that you can fall into there if you're not careful. And the first, I think, applies to a lot more than just the business of games. It applies a lot to design of games and other elements, where it's like assuming that I am somehow representative of the audience for Ghost when I'm just not. Like I love MMOs, but there are a whole bunch of other types of games I play. Like most of what I'm playing these days is single player JRPGs, and then I've just gotten back into Destiny 2 and I'm still playing a lot of Overwatch. And like that may, or like what do I, John, want in a game is generally not, I think, the right way to say like, what are all of the hopefully large group of players of Ghost going to want. And then I think the second trap is that like, well, what I want as a player is to get awesome content delivered really quickly for games that I love, and I'd rather not pay for it at all. And like that doesn't work as a business strategy. Like, at some point, actually, if we're going to support the studio and the talented team here and be able to do that for long term, like we are going to need to take some elements of the game and say like, yes, this is where we want players to pay.
All right.
And so like I do think it's helpful, and in particular making sure that we understand like what are the places where, yes, maybe that would make a lot of money if we did this thing, but it's just going to alienate the players that we need to keep for the long term. And I would hate it myself as a player. Like this probably sounds a little bit naive at times, but I'm very hopeful that if we take a long-term lens and make decisions that feel fair to us about when and how much we ask players to spend on the game, that we'll be rewarded for that with players who stick around, play our game for the long term. And when we do ask them to pay for stuff, they feel okay about that.
Great.
Like,
yeah,
that's maybe a pipe dream.
Sure.
The stuff is hard,
but
it sure would be really nice if that were true and it worked.
Greg, anything to add on that point?
Yeah, you have to balance your intuition as a game developer with your experience as a game developer, but also with like data and research. I'm always a little skeptical of these studios that say, well, we just made a game that we wanted to play. It's noble, and yeah, you should have passion about the game you're trying to play, but chances are you don't understand how young people in Korea think about the video game market today. And you may be doing a disservice to them if you just make the assumptions that, well, this is the way people play games, right? Like consoles in Korea and China are not a thing the way they are in the West. So if you make a console only game, those players will never play it. You may be making assumptions about how many hours players want to play a game because you're probably statistically older than a lot of the players and have, life and family and jobs. And you're like, oh yeah, 5-hour game sounds great. And then people are like, what do you mean? That's nothing. I want a 30 or 100-hour game. So long-winded way of saying, I think you have to, plant your flag, but then also verify. That's why the feedback is so important. Like, oh, well, we didn't think anyone would care about this feature. Turns out people really want, this feature is really important to them. We better spend a little more time on it.
Sure. Well, that goes well to this next question from Barry Doe 3, who says, you mentioned that Ghost is not going to be too time-consuming, so players can take breaks, as traditional MMOs tend to reward dedicated players with rare items that not everyone else has. What is the case going to be with Ghost?
So, yeah, overall, our philosophy is that Ghost should fit into your life. And I compare it a lot to the way Netflix is run today, which is, I always say NetEase when I mean Netflix, which is a really funny Freudian slip there, but I really mean Netflix this time, that they release a whole season and you watch the season kind of at your pace. You may binge it, you may watch an episode a night. And then when you're finished, you're like, that was really awesome. I can't wait for the next season. You don't say, oh, I'm going to play episode 10 over and over and over again, right? Like, it's not, you may watch it more than once, but you're not going to watch it 30 times.
Sure.
And I think that's sometimes what the MMO experience is I'm ready for new content. It isn't out yet. What can I do in the meantime? We will have optional activities. How optional they are depends a lot on the player. Some players are like, I'm a completionist. I'm going to do everything. It's like, well, dude, you just said nothing is really optional to you then. We'll have rare items. We'll have chase things. We'll have, tough achievements that are there for the person that does want to spend 100 hours a week working on stuff. Those shouldn't feel mandatory, but mandatory is sometimes in the eye of the beholder.
Sure. Which is another great question about social gaming. We got a few from Twitter and some from the chat. I'll just kind of summarize these. But one of them said, many of us have great friends that we made through playing MMOs. How is your game going to help players forge these social bonds? And then we'll get to the opposite of that in a sec, but let's start with that. What kinds of what sort of thought are you giving it this early about how are you trying to get people to group up versus just stay on their own and solo this business?
I mean, that's a big part of our thesis is we want people to be hanging out mostly with friends. And MMOs are kind of notorious for throwing up barriers to that. Like often if you even get like one quest ahead of your buddy, it's really hard to figure out, oh, we're out of sync, or do I just stand around and wait for them to catch up? Things like that. Again, the whole idea of the blue shards is it's somewhere you can go and kind of spend with your friends. And that even goes to things like playing asynchronously, which are normally really hard to do in an MMO. Imagine a blue shard, like I go and gather a lot of resources. So when Scott logs in the next morning, he can use those to help build our base. Or John runs around and scouts out the area and flags a bunch of interesting places that we can explore, even if he won't be online when the exploration happens. That's really hard to do in an MMO usually to kind of play asynchronously like that.
Right.
We also think just the division of labor works well. And when a lot of people played Valheim, they would have the person that goes out and hunts the monsters, and then the person that kind of stays home and builds the base. And that's different players have different things they want to do. They're at different power levels, different skill levels of the game. When the only thing you can do in an MMO is like go out and kill things, then that's the only kind of progression that matters is your ability to be more efficient at killing things.
Right. So if I'm now the other player, let's say I'm the player that loves to get into these games and have everyone leave me alone. I play them like single player games. And I'll be honest, sometimes I do. I'll play Final Fantasy that way. It's very single player story focused. But even WoW, I'll play it that way. And obviously Warcraft and Blizzard have gone, various directions to make it easier for players to do stuff on their own. Their new dungeon companion system, forgot the name of it. Warband, is it?
Oh yeah.
AI, basically AI controlled characters. I think it's in a response to what Final Fantasy is already doing with their dungeons. You can go in there with a bunch of AI people and not have to sit around making groups or having people get kicked or all those, all the side effects of trying to get strangers to play with each other. What do you say to that solo player so that he's as excited about this as the groups are?
So this is a spicy answer, but this is not a solo game. If you want to play a solo RPG, I would invite people, go play Hades 2, go play Baldur's Gate 3. Those are outstanding single player games. That is different from a social player who isn't feeling it tonight, or, I just need a break, or I just kind of want to do something low key. Like, yeah, there will be plenty of things you can do alone in the game for short periods of time. It's not the kind of game where you have to stay grouped up 100% of the time, or you'll die to tough monsters or something.
Right.
But we think that part of the way modern MMOs have lost their way is kind of overly embracing you should be able to do everything in the game as a complete solo player without relying on other humans or friends or anything like that. The people who really want to play the game as misanthropes who don't interact with other humans at all, honestly, will probably be disappointed. That's not really the direction we're going.
Interesting. So do you feel like that is, obviously that can be a pillar of what you're designing, but do you feel like that's counter to what the player base is moving toward? In other words, just to play devil's advocate, if that's why MMOs have quote unquote lost their way, it seems like they were doing a lot of those decisions based on player behavior or based on what players seemed like they wanted, or maybe a drop off in big groups. It's like, well, we can't get 40 people together anymore, so let's do 10, or whatever the decision might be. I guess I would ask it. I guess it depends on how high of a tide that is to push against. But do you feel like that's going to be a problem because some players, or that this is where MMOs have gone, and if Ghost doesn't go that way, well, then it's too hard to coordinate. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. When there is a little bit of friction, it tends to add to the social stickiness. Part of the reason people log into MMOs is because their friends are playing tonight and they don't want to let their friends down, or they want to hang out with their friends and see what they're doing. I think the reason people stick with these games for so long often comes down to the social groups they made, either people they met in game or people they came into the game with. And if you make the game too soloable, I think you're competing then against a lot of games that do solo better, because you can have a lasting impact on the world in a game like Baldur's Gate, or you can be the champion of the universe. If it's a single player game, you don't have to worry about all these other yahoos running around. What multiplayer games do well, what massive multiplayer games do well, and arguably the only thing they do really well is social. It's the only game where you can play with a lot of other people at the same time, and that fabric is what kind of leads to the awesome storytelling. The best storytelling in MMOs, in my mind, is not, oh, did you see that cool cinematic where Tyrande did this thing? It's, my buddies and I were on this fight and 3 people were dead, and the healer did this cool thing and we all laughed about it later. That's the storytelling.
Yeah. It makes me think, say what you want about 38 Studios and the mess that studio ended up being, but their putting out of Kingdoms of Amalur at the time seemed to be a trend I liked, because it was the things I like in an MMO put into a single player experience. And by that, I mean, open worlds, lots of dudes with stuff over their heads telling me they had a quest to do, that the kind of loop that is MMO content put into a single player focused game. And I kind of thought, or had hoped at the time, that you'd see more of that. And I guess you could argue games like the Souls likes and that sort of thing, they're a bit like that. Elden Ring, probably the best example given how open it is. So hearing you say this makes me want that more. I don't want to go to a big multiplayer playground so I can have a single player experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Though a lot, I think where we might get into trouble, and we don't want to go too far down that path, is the first MMO that I ever played tons of was Final Fantasy XI. And in that game, you literally couldn't leave the city by yourself without dying, losing experience. And so I would spend hours in the city. I need to find a group to go do anything. And I made some amazing friends in that game, I think, because of that friction, but also like it was pretty frustrating where, okay, I've got an hour to play tonight, or I've got 20 minutes. It didn't even feel like it was worth logging on because I would need to spend the whole time finding a group in order to do anything that I wanted to in the game, and then I'd have to go. And so I think some of the, like what Greg mentioned of, you could play with your friends, but do it a little bit asynchronously, where I'm going to go, explore the blue zone that my friends and I are playing, so that when my next friend logs on, they've got more of the map revealed, or, I've started to build our base up, or having other types of activities that you can go do. Like in Destiny, I love, hey, I've got 20 minutes to play right now. I can't, my friends aren't around, but I can go do lost sectors, which in that game are these like 5 to 15-minute tough solo challenges with pretty good rewards. And that gives me an answer to, I don't have the hours, I can't organize 20 of my friends right now, but I want to play this game and feel like I'm doing something that matters and is impactful. So I think there is a balance there too.
I agree. Now, the question I want to ask next is maybe one that we could revisit when we bring some engineers back on to the show, but I still think it's worth touching on, Greg, and it's this. Ethrin Castle on Twitter asked, how do you decide what should be processed client/server side? I look at New World as a recent example of this being really funky and exploitable at launch. I find that fascinating for some reason. I'd love to know. I always like to know the ratio of what client is happening and what server is happening and why is it split that way, and what does that do to latency and those sorts of things? Any light you can shed on that?
The servers aren't doing a lot that's very interesting to watch, for one. Like, there's no graphics or anything like that. It's all just math going down behind the scenes. Anything that's kind of visually or, even audioly interesting is on the client.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that you have to do on the server is anything where the making sure what one player sees and what another player see is simpatico, which often, cheating is a big part of that, where if you have a multiplayer client game, you just have to assume that it's going to be exploitable, and that may be fine depending on your community. We don't think people will be very tolerant of that for an MMO, particularly an MMO that has any PvP at all. So you can generally trust that the server, sometimes servers can be hacked, but generally if it's on the server, it's safe from exploits. And if the server says, well, you swung and missed that monster, that's reality. Because your client might say you hit the monster and my client might say I missed the monster, and then you need some way to arbitrate that. And that's what servers do a really good job of.
Right.
Now, they have a lot of downsides. Ping is one. If you're too far away just physically from the server, it could be slow. Servers are expensive to run. You either, the olden days you would have I think I still have freaking Blackhand back there behind me.
Yep.
You'd have to buy them. Nowadays, most companies rent, AWS or Google servers, but that's a big part of the cost of running a live service game. So there are pros and cons. We will try to put everything on the client we can that isn't exploitable, and then we'll put the rest on the server, but hopefully minimal.
So from a technical side of things, distributable cloud-based technology has greatly advanced in recent years. That seems only good for you guys, right? Like you've got options. It's not the same as the old days where it's like, well, we need a data center and we need this many blades. Oh shoot, our game took off. Now we have to invest in more of these blades. We need people there running it. Like, it's different now. It's like clouds. The cloud thing is virtual often, so you're not even really sure where your server, quote unquote, resides. It kind of resides everywhere,
and it moves around.
Yeah. So I assume that's all a boon for what you guys have planned, right?
Yeah. One of the kind of lines in the sand we made really early on is you will not join Ghost and see a big server list and have to pick, well, what server do you want to go to? Because then that's always such an intimidating question. Like, well, I don't know. Where are my friends? How far away is this server? Is it a PvE server, PvP server? Like, we won't do that. We'll just let you go in the game and play. We still, behind the scenes, have to allocate people onto different servers, like you said, because sometimes there's more people playing than at other times and things like that. But all of that should be really transparent to the player.
Interesting. Well, that is about all we've got time for today. However, there are still some questions remaining that we're going to hang on to and use appropriately down the road, either for more big Q&A episodes or when we have specific folks on that can answer certain questions. Like we're bound to have some technical folks on soon that can speak to some of these, capacity issues and how you're going to scale and that sort of stuff, which I really look forward to those. I don't know why that stuff fascinates me, but it does. And, more gameplay down the road. But you guys have been awesome with your questions. Thank you for sending these in and submitting them. Once again, a huge thanks to Faye for helping organize all of this behind the scenes so that we had the questions at our fingertips. And for the questions we got today live in the show, you guys are fantastic as well. Any parting thoughts, John, before we send you back into the fray of business?
It makes it sound somehow dangerous.
It does. I don't know why.
It was fun talking with you today. I'm glad I got a chance to join. And yeah, we'll continue. It looks like from Faye that we got a bunch more questions that we didn't have a chance to answer. We'll make sure that we're still doing that. I know the whole team on our side of things continues to just love the engagement that we're getting from people who are excited about Ghost. So we'll make sure that we're finding ways to double back, and when we actually have our engineers on here next time, they could probably give way better answers than some of the server stuff than if I tried to.
Yep. I've seen some new names pop up on the website. So people at home, make sure you go to fantasticpixelcastle.com and check out who the new folks are and get to know some of these guys on the team a little bit better by checking those out. Greg, any final thoughts as we close on episode 7?
I mean, we're having the time of our lives. It is a dark time in the game industry right now, and I'm very grateful for one, just to have a job, but we are having fun. I know we can get into all the nitty gritty of like, oh, this is a really tough problem to solve. What are we going to do? But I come to work every day excited about what we're going to get to talk about and tackle. So it's been awesome.
That's fantastic. I love it. Fantastic. Speaking of which, Fantastic Pixel Castle, everybody. Go get that and bookmark it because that's where all the cool stuff will show up. And of course, this show airs every month. We let you know with plenty of time, especially if we're taking questions. So keep your eye on all our Twitter accounts and that sort of thing. You can find everything you need for the show at frogpants.com/street. That is going to do it for us, for me, for Greg, for John, for Faye, and everybody else at Fantastic Pixel Castle. We'll see you next time.
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Yes. Get more at frogpants.com.
And scene. Well done, everyone. Yay. That was great. As usual. Yeah, well done. That was a very, very good episode. So many questions to get to still. It's just hard.
So many good ones.
Yeah, really
Here's
good
one
stuff
I
in
can
here.
answer for chat just real quick.
Yeah, let's do it.
Limiting servers per region. There's no gameplay reason to do that. The reason you do that is often for political or legal reasons, like data protection or things like that, where you're not allowed to have the data from some player in another reason, or you have to limit certain content in some reason to another. Like, as far as we're concerned, it's cool to get to play with your friends around the world.
So do you run into that a lot where it's like, what was the thing with servers for WoW in China couldn't have skeletons. There's a cultural thing there or something. I can't remember what the deal was. So all the undead had to have, fully formed arms. They couldn't have the bony elbows and all that.
Yeah.
I assume you run into that all the time with like, whether it's purely a cultural thing or straight up, they have laws in one part of the world that will not let you store chat data, but then everywhere else they do. That must be a pain to deal with.
It's a pain, and they don't make it easy. Like, there's not like, here's the list of like what you can do in Thailand versus what you can do in Germany. Often it's trial and error where you try to get the game approved and then they deny it based on some reason, and then you go and fix it.
Yeah. That's a really interesting.
The skeleton thing is so funny too, because when we were in China the other day, John and I were there.
Yeah.
And Shanghai has an amazing coffee scene, and you could get, I got a coconut latte. They had like wine lattes. It was nuts.
Weird.
And I held up my cup, and there was like a skeleton on it. I'm like, what the hell? We were told you can't have skeletons in China. And they talked about it for a minute, the Chinese folks, and they're like, Well, those are different parts of the government, and games are still viewed as something for kids, so you can't be too scary. But for a coffee
Oh.
cup, that's fine. I'm like, wow, this is what we're navigating.
Interesting. I didn't know that either. I thought it was some really like big no-no across the board, but now I guess that makes
Same,
sense. Yeah, they've got some pretty strict rules for kids and how long they can play and all that. Why not hide all the skeletons while you're at it?
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious to, like, as you guys get closer to that part of this, I mean, obviously a lot of this happens at I assume NetEase, this is where NetEase kicks in on a lot of things. This is where you get knowledge about where things can go and where they can't and whatever.
So traditionally, the kind of things where a publisher helps you out, and they're, for all purposes, our publisher.
Right.
It lets us focus on making an awesome game without an artist immediately having to say, oh man, did this monster I make, is that too skull-like? Right now, we can just say, just make awesome monsters.
Yeah. Well, I love it.
Yeah, I don't want our team to be in the business of like, what are the different local it's not the right way to make something awesome and let people express themselves creatively.
It's almost better to make something awesome and then not the whole ask for forgiveness later, but you make something rad and you make it so rad that whatever they make you knock back is still radder than it would have been. Do you know what I mean? Like, what? There's an example of this, and I know what it is. It's that Team America puppet thing that the South Park guys made. They made I won't get into details, but they made a certain scene as ridiculously over the top offensive as they could, knowing that the censors were going to make them walk it back. But they knew if they went really far, that they would get it back to kind of where they wanted it instead of way back where they didn't want it. And this is obviously different and more complicated, but it does seem like maybe, you guys just focus on making a rad game. And then they find out, we can't have the skeleton in there. Okay, well, we dial it back. But you don't want that to affect your design, right? You want to make what you want to make.
Yeah, it's easier to do it on the back end than have everyone have to be like a cultural expert of every potential country we might ship in. That's a lot to ask. I mean, we don't even know it. I don't know it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, there you go, chat. You got a little extra for being here live. Tip of the spear chat room. Thank you for being here. And another show next month. We'll let you know when, probably close to around this time of the month in June. Who knows who'll be on? We don't know yet, but it'll be somebody awesome. We know Greg will be
Maybe
here.
It'll be Faye. Maybe we'll get Faye on.
Maybe Faye will be on. I need a Faye in my life. I need someone who is this good at like behind the scenes while I'm doing shows. I don't have a person like this. This would be... I'm not saying I want Faye. I'm saying I would love that.
You can't have her.
I can't have Faye. She's taken.
Yeah, we already hired her.
I got to find a Faye who's an equivalent Faye. How about that? Faye 2.0. No, Faye 1.2. It doesn't have to be that different. Anyway, thank you all, chat. We're going to hang up the stream now, and we hope to see you all soon. Thanks again for being a part of this. And don't forget, if you got a hot thought during the month and you're like, I just want to text you guys this info, you can use this number, 801-471-0462. It's 801-471-0462. It's voicemails and texts, and we are happy to have those for future shows. All right, everybody, thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.